The firelight flickered against the rough walls of the lodge, shadows dancing like restless spirits. She sat close to the flames, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her breath unsteady, though she tried to hide it. The night outside was silent, except for the whistle of the wind sweeping over the plains, carrying with it the cries of distant wolves. Yet within those cries, there was something else, an echo, almost human, as if the land itself was whispering warnings that she could not yet understand. The Lakota warrior who had spoken his vow stood a little apart, watching her with a calm that seemed carved from stone. His eyes held the kind of strength that came from years of battles, not only against enemies of flesh and bone, but against doubt, grief, and the unforgiving winters of the plains. Still, beneath his steady gaze was something softer, though carefully guarded. He had promised her safety, promised that no hand would harm her so long as his heart still beat. But promises, she knew, could be broken, and oaths had a way of turning into chains. Her voice, still trembling from her confession, lingered in the air between them. She had not meant for the words to spill out the way they did, cracked with fear and rawness. Yet once spoken, there was no taking them back. She had revealed a truth that made her vulnerable, a truth she had carried like a hidden wound, and now this warrior knew it. She wondered if he saw her as fragile or foolish, or if he saw her as something to protect because of her innocence. The night dragged on with a heavy stillness, and the flames shrank low. She wanted to ask him why he swore himself to her so quickly, why he spoke with such certainty when her world had always been filled with uncertainty. But each time the question formed on her tongue, her courage faltered. Instead, she found herself studying the small things, the way his hands rested against the hilt of his blade, even when sitting, the way his hair fell like dark rivers over his shoulders, the way his silence felt less like absence and more like a shield. He broke that silence only once, his voice low and even. "The land listens," he said. "The spirits know when a promise is true. If I fail it, they will not forgive me." The weight of those words pressed against her chest, and though she did not understand the full measure of his faith, she felt the seriousness of it. His life was not his own, not entirely. He belonged to the code of his people, to the spirits he believed watched from the stars above. And now, somehow, she had been tied into that code, bound to his vow whether she wished it or not. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain, though the sky was still clear. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her eyes darting to the flap of the lodge, half expecting shadows to enter at any moment. For there was danger still. She knew it. Someone, somewhere, wanted her frightened and unguarded. That was why she had spoken her fear aloud, why she had whispered her plea. It wasn't just the fear of him, or of what lay between them. It was the fear of something darker still, creeping ever closer. The Lakota's gaze sharpened as if he sensed her thoughts. "They will come," he said, and his words were not a warning but a statement of fact. "Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but they will come." She swallowed hard. Her mind reached back to the place where her troubles began, to the day her path crossed with the one who now threatened to take everything from her. She remembered the unease in his smile, the way his eyes followed her, the way his voice promised gifts that were not truly gifts at all. She had run then, run as fast as her legs could carry her, but running did not end the chase. Now, with this warrior at her side, she was no longer alone. Yet sometimes being guarded only reminded her of the danger she was in. Every glance over her shoulder, every creak in the night, every whisper of wind through the grass seemed sharper, heavier. Her fear had not left her. It had only been joined by his presence, and she did not know if that made it easier or harder to bear. He rose then, stepping to the lodge entrance, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. He stood tall, scanning the dark horizon as if the night itself might try to rise up against them. She watched him, wondering what strength looked like from inside his heart. Was he afraid too? Did the weight of his vow ever make him tremble, even when his body did not?
Show it?
She would never know unless he spoke, and men like him rarely spoke of such things. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. She flinched at the sound, though it was harmless. Her nerves stretched thin. Her thoughts drifted to the stories she had heard as a child, stories of guardians who walked with the spirits, who could call upon the wind and the river to shield those under their protection. She wondered if this man before her was something like that, or if he was simply flesh and blood, fighting battles much greater than any one person should carry. Time passed slowly, as if the world had slowed its breath to listen. She tried to close her eyes, tried to rest, but sleep would not come. Every time her lids lowered, she saw faces in the dark, shadows reaching, voices calling her name in tones that were neither kind nor forgiving. She opened her eyes again, her chest heaving, and found his gaze upon her once more. He said nothing, only nodded once, as if to remind her he had not forgotten his vow. And yet, the question gnawed at her. Why her? Why had her life, so ordinary until that night, suddenly become entangled with oaths and dangers? Why had her cry for mercy echoed so deeply in his heart that he promised protection without hesitation? She could not ask now, not when her throat was tight and her voice would betray her fear. But she promised herself she would know one day, even if the answer terrified her. The night wore on, heavy with silence and unspoken truths. The storm in the distance drew closer, thunder grumbling across the plains, the first hints of lightning, painting the sky with jagged light. She felt it deep within her bones, that this was not just a storm of rain and wind. It was a storm of fate, of choices that had yet to be made, of shadows that would soon step out of hiding. The warrior did not move from his post, and she did not dare look away from him. For in his stance, she found the smallest thread of steadiness, enough to keep her from unraveling completely. Still, the air felt charged, as if something unseen stood just beyond the firelight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her breath caught, her heart pounding louder than the thunder. She wanted to ask him if he felt it too, if the storm carried more than rain. But before she could speak, a sound cracked through the night, a branch breaking, deliberate and near. The warrior's hand flew to his blade, his eyes narrowing into the darkness beyond. She froze, her body rigid, her mind screaming the one truth she feared most. They were no longer alone. The sound of the branch snapping still echoed in her ears, sharp and final, like a warning the night itself wanted them to hear. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she could not move. The Lakota warrior's hand tightened around the hilt of his blade, his posture shifting as smoothly as a shadow, ready to strike if needed. His eyes, trained by years of vigilance, narrowed toward the darkness where the sound had come from. The fire's light no longer felt like warmth to her. It felt like a beacon, exposing them, making them vulnerable to eyes that watched from just beyond the circle of light. She pressed, her fingers tighter against the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, fighting the urge to cry out. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, a silence that stretched long and heavy, daring her to believe that maybe it was only an animal. But deep down she knew it wasn't. She could feel it, the way her pulse raced. The way the air seemed heavier now, charged with unseen danger. Something or someone was out there, lingering just far enough to remain unseen, yet close enough to remind them they were not safe. The warrior did not move immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, listening in the way only someone trained in survival could. His breath was steady, controlled, but his entire frame was tense. He glanced back at her once, his expression unreadable, but the look in his eyes told her everything. He knew they were being hunted. She remembered the man she had run from, the one whose presence had shadowed her every step before she stumbled into this lodge. His threats had not been loud. They had been quiet, careful, whispered with a conviction that made her skin crawl. He had spoken as if her fate was already sealed, as if she belonged to him no matter how far she ran. Now, in the cover of night, she wondered if he was here, waiting just beyond the firelight, savoring her fear. The Lakota shifted his weight, stepping silently toward the entrance. His movements were precise, each step measured, his body merging with the darkness as if he were part of it. She wanted to call out, to beg him not to leave her alone even for a moment, but she bit her tongue. Any sound could draw whoever was out there closer. Instead, she forced herself to remain still, though her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum calling out her fear. Minutes dragged by, though they felt like hours. The fire hissed as a drop of rain struck the coals, the storm drawing nearer, each rumble of thunder shaking the earth beneath them. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself of his vow, of the words he had spoken with such unwavering certainty. He would not abandon her, not while danger crept near. Still, promises felt thin when shadows pressed in on every side. Then, she heard it again, a rustle in the grass, this time closer, followed by the faintest sound of a footstep. Her body stiffened. This was no wandering animal. Her instincts screamed the truth before her mind could catch up. Someone was circling them. The warrior's voice broke through the tension, low but firm. "Stay inside. Do not move." His command steadied her more than she expected, like a hand reaching through the dark to keep her grounded. She clutched the blanket tighter and nodded, though she wasn't sure if he saw. The lodge flap shifted as he stepped out into the storm-darkened night, and immediately the fire felt smaller, weaker without him there. She listened hard, straining to catch any sound. His footsteps, a clash of steel, a voice carried on the wind. But all she heard was the roll of thunder and the pounding of her own heartbeat. Her thoughts spiraled as she sat in the lonely glow of the fire. Who were they? Was it only the man she feared, or were there others, men loyal to him, willing to hunt her like prey across the plains? The idea of him bringing more, gathering shadows around him, made her stomach twist. She thought of the stories whispered among the women she once knew, of men who took what they wanted by force and called it destiny. She prayed she had not fallen into such a story, but the signs were everywhere. Outside, the clash finally came, a sharp, sudden noise of steel against steel. She gasped, clapping her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound. Another crash followed, then silence, then a grunt cut short. She did not know whose voice it was. Her chest burned as she held her breath, listening for anything that would tell her he was still standing. The firelight flickered low, and she fed it a log with trembling hands, desperate for the comfort of light, though she feared it might draw attention. Every instinct in her screamed that she should run, slip out the back of the lodge and vanish into the storm. But another part of her knew she wouldn't get far. Alone, she would be nothing but a mark against the night, easy to find, easier still to claim. Her mind raced back to the words he had spoken earlier. They will come. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. He had known. His certainty scared her more than the silence that followed the clash outside. She wondered if this was the life he had always lived, waiting for enemies to appear, facing them with steel in the night, promising protection he could never be fully sure of. And now she was caught in the center of it, her own safety balanced. On the edge of his blade, the storm broke suddenly, rain crashing against the lodge roof, drowning out everything else. She strained her ears, but the world outside was lost in the roar of water and the crack of thunder. She wanted to cry, to scream, to beg for the night to pass quickly, but she forced herself to stay silent. Every drop of rain felt like time, slipping away, a countdown to something she could not name. Her thoughts drifted, against her will, to the man who hunted her. His face came back to her in flashes, his smile that never reached his eyes, the way he spoke as though her voice did not matter. the way he made her feel like nothing more than something to be taken. She thought of how powerless she had felt then, how powerless she still felt now, sitting in the lodge as if waiting for her fate to arrive. And yet, in the corner of her mind, there was another thought. The warrior's eyes when he swore to protect her. The way his voice did not waver when he spoke of spirits watching. It was enough to hold on to, even as fear gnawed at her. Suddenly the flap of the lodge was pushed aside, and she froze. A shadow filled the doorway, broad-shouldered and tall. Her heart leapt to her throat, unsure if it was her protector or her pursuer. The figure stood silent for a long moment, dripping rainwater before stepping fully into the light. It was him, the Lakota warrior. His blade gleamed wet, his expression harder than stone, but his eyes found hers immediately. Relief washed over her, though it was short-lived, for there was blood on his arm, and his silence carried more weight than any words could. She wanted to ask what had happened, who had been out there, if the danger was gone. But the words stuck in her throat, too heavy with dread. He sat near the fire, not speaking, only feeding the flames as if to push the night back. She realized then that silence was not safety. Silence meant the danger was still near, waiting, watching. The storm raged outside, and inside the small lodge, the air thickened with unspoken truths. She knew he had fought someone, maybe more than one, and she knew they would not stop with tonight. The conflict was far from over. It had only just begun, and as lightning split the sky outside, she felt it in her bones. The storm was not only in the air. It was in their lives, in the promise that bound them, in the shadows that would not rest until they claimed her. She closed her eyes, but there was no peace in the darkness, only the growing certainty that the worst was yet to come. The storm did not ease. It pressed harder against the lodge, the rain pounding the earth as though trying to bury them beneath its weight. The fire cracked and hissed, fighting to stay alive, its flames shrinking low but stubborn. She sat close to it, her eyes fixed on the warrior across from her. He had not spoken since returning, and the silence wrapped around him like armor. His expression gave nothing away, but the tension in his shoulders, the faint trail of blood at his sleeve, and the way his hand never strayed far from his blade told her everything. She wanted to ask if he was hurt, but the question caught in her throat. Something about his stillness warned her not to break it. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a bowstring drawn tight, waiting for the arrow to fly. She could feel it in the air, too, the sense that something was closing in on them, that whatever threat prowled the night had not been driven back, only delayed. The storm outside was their cover and their trap. The howling wind made it impossible to tell how many footsteps moved beyond the firelight. The thunder rolled like war drums, drowning out the sounds she most feared to hear, and every flash of lightning lit the plains for only a heartbeat, just long enough to spark her imagination with shapes that could have been men, or nothing at all. The warrior rose suddenly, moving to the flap of the lodge. He stood there, his silhouette tall and steady, scanning the darkness as though he could pierce the veil of rain with his gaze alone. She held her breath, waiting for him to speak, to reassure her, but instead he only reached for the weapon at his side. That single movement was enough to send a chill through her. If he felt the need to ready his blade again, then danger was closer than she dared admit. Her mind raced. She thought of the man who had chased her, the one whose promises had been poisoned, who had spoken as if her fear only made her more desirable prey. He was cunning, she knew, and he would not stop simply because he had been forced back once. If anything, he would return with more fury, more resolve, perhaps even more men at his side. And she knew, deep down, that this night would not pass without blood. The warrior finally turned back to her, his eyes catching the glow of the fire. His voice was low but unshakable. "They are out there, waiting. The words dropped into her chest like stones. She could not pretend anymore that this was only her imagination, or that the storm might wash the danger away. It was real, pressing, in from every side. And though she wanted to believe his vow would be enough, a part of her wondered if even his strength could hold back what was coming. The fire sputtered, and she leaned forward to feed it another log, her hands trembling as she did. Each crack of thunder jolted her nerves, each flicker of lightning painted the lodge walls with brief, ghostly shadows. She felt trapped, like prey cornered in a den, waiting for the predators to strike. And yet, in the pit of her fear, there was something else. A strange thread of courage she had not expected. Perhaps it came from his presence, or from the realization that she could not keep running forever. The night stretched thin, every moment pulling taut like a string about to snap. Then, just as she thought the silence might drive her mad, there came another sound, faint but clear. A whistle carried through the storm. It was low, deliberate, the kind of signal only men gave to each other in the dark. Her blood ran cold. The warrior stiffened. His hand gripped his weapon tighter, his eyes flashing with a sharpness she had not yet seen. He knew the sound well, and his voice, when it came, was grim. They are calling to each other. Her breath quickened. They were not facing one man alone. The hunter had brought others with him. The lodge felt smaller than ever, a fragile barrier between her and the storm, between her and the hands that would drag her back into the shadows she had tried so hard to escape. She watched the warrior move with calm precision, extinguishing the fire until only embers remained. Darkness swallowed the lodge, and she felt her panic surge. But he leaned close, whispering low enough for only her to hear. The light guides them. Without it, they will not see us first. Her heart thundered in her chest, louder than the storm outside. She wanted to cling to him, to beg him not to leave her side, but she forced herself to remain still. His calm steadiness demanded her trust, even as fear clawed at her insides. The minutes crawled by. She could hear movement now, shapes shifting. Through the grass, water splashing under heavy steps. Shadows pressed against the edges of the storm, waiting for their moment. Every sound scraped against her nerves like knives. She could not see them, but she felt them drawing closer. The warrior crouched near the entrance, poised like a predator himself, his breath steady, his body ready to strike. She realized then that the battle had already begun, though no blade had yet clashed. This was the war of silence, of waiting, of fear sharpened into a weapon. And then the moment shattered. A voice cut through the storm, deep and mocking, carried by the wind. You can't hide her forever. Her entire body froze. She knew that voice. It slithered into her ears with the same sickening certainty it always had. The man she feared was out there, closer now, his words twisted with triumph. She wanted to scream, to run, but the warrior's hand lifted, commanding silence. His eyes never left the storm outside. Another voice answered, cruel laughter following. We'll take her tonight. Even your spirits cannot stop us. Her throat closed, panic clawing up her chest. They were here not just to threaten, but to claim her, to rip away every promise of safety. She clutched the blanket tighter around, her shoulders fighting the urge to collapse under the weight of it all. The warrior straightened, his presence filling the lodge even without words. His vow hung heavy in the air, unbroken. He had sworn to guard her forever, and she could see in his eyes that he would not bend, no matter how many shadows waited outside. The storm raged louder, the thunder splitting the night as though the sky itself sensed the battle to come. She could feel the air vibrating with tension, every heartbeat carrying them closer to the inevitable clash. And in that final moment before the storm broke fully upon them, she realized something that made her blood run colder still. The danger was not only outside. It was inside her too. Her fear, her doubt, her memory of his voice whispering that she would never escape. As lightning lit the plains once more, she saw shapes moving closer, circling, waiting to strike. The warrior's blade gleamed as he drew it, his body a wall between her and the storm. She held her breath, every muscle trembling. The night had led them here, to this edge, where everything hung in balance. And she knew, with a certainty that hollowed her chest, that the climax was upon them, that before the dawn came, blood would fall on the earth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The storm broke fully, sheets of rain striking the ground. In wild fury, thunder shaking the earth as if the sky itself wanted to tear apart the night. The warrior stood unmoving in the lodge entrance, his blade drawn, his eyes fixed on the shadows that circled like wolves. She sat just behind him, clutching the blanket so tightly it cut into her palms, her body frozen between fear and desperate hope. She could hear them now, voices carried by the storm, laughter cruel and sharp, and footsteps pressing closer. The first man broke from the darkness with a shout, charging through the rain. The clash came fast, steel against steel, a ringing cry that split the storm. She gasped, covering her mouth, watching as the Lakota warrior met the strike head-on. His movements were swift, almost too swift to follow, his blade flashing in the high lightning's glow. The enemy staggered, fell into the mud, and was swallowed by the storm, but more followed. She could see their shapes weaving through the grass, their eyes lit by hunger and cruelty. They called to each other, their voices rising over the thunder. Each step they took pressed harder against her chest, each shout reminding her of the man who had hunted her from the beginning, the one whose voice still haunted her dreams. He came last, as she knew he would. His shadow was taller than the others, his stride slow and sure, as if he owned the night. When his voice cut through the storm, it sent a shiver through her bones. "You can't keep her," he sneered. "She was mine before you ever spoke your promise." The warrior did not flinch. His voice was steady, carried by conviction alone. "She belongs to no man. She walks her own path, and I will guard it." The words struck her deeper than the storm itself. For so long, she had carried the weight of fear, believing she was prey, believing she could never break free from the grip of the one who pursued her. But now, hearing the vow spoken again with such fire, she felt something inside her shift. The clash that followed was unlike the others. The hunter stepped forward with a blade of his own, and the two men circled, storm and lightning bearing witness. Steel met steel again and again, sparks flying with each strike. She watched, her breath caught in her throat, as the warrior fought with a grace carved from years of battle, each movement sure, each strike precise. But the hunter was no fool. He was fast, cunning, and his blows carried the weight of obsession. The fight raged longer than she thought possible, neither giving ground. The rain washed over them both, their figures blurred by the storm, yet the sound of their blades rang clear, echoing through the night like a chant of fate. She could see the strain in the warrior's movements, the way his body bore wounds from earlier strikes, yet his eyes never faltered. He had promised, and he fought, as if breaking that promise was death itself. Finally, with a roar that cut through thunder, the hunter lunged, his blade aimed straight for the heart. For a heartbeat, she thought it was over, that the vow would shatter in the storm. But the warrior twisted, his strike faster, his blade finding its mark. The hunter fell, his cry lost in the wind, and the night swallowed him whole. The others who had come with him froze. For a moment they stood in the rain, shadows wavering, uncertain. Then, one by one, they turned and vanished into the storm, their courage broken, their laughter silenced. The plains grew quiet again, save for the storm's fading rage. She sat, trembling, unable to move, staring at the figure of the warrior as he stood over the fallen man. The fight had ended, but the weight of it lingered. Slowly, he turned back toward her, his expression unreadable, his blade dripping with rain. He stepped inside the lodge, setting the weapon down at last, his shoulders heavy. For the first time, she found her voice. "Why?" she whispered. "Why fight for me? Why risk everything?" He sank to the ground near the fire's embers, his breath steady but slow. "Because no one should live in fear," he said simply. "Because a promise is not just words. It is life. And because the spirits heard your voice, and so did I." Her chest ached with a mix of relief and something deeper, something she had not allowed herself to feel until now. His words struck a truth she had long tried to bury. For so long, she had believed she was powerless, that her voice carried no weight. Yet it was her plea, trembling and fragile, that had bound his vow, that had brought her to this moment. The storm eased, the rain softening until only the drip of water remained. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, painting the plains in pale light. She stepped outside, the wet earth cool beneath her feet, the air fresh with the scent of new beginnings. For the first time in what felt like forever, she breathed without fear, pressing against her chest. The warrior joined her, standing silently at her side. They did not need words. The night had spoken enough, and the silence now felt different. No longer heavy, but calm. She looked at him, at the man who had sworn to guard her, and knew the vow had changed them both. Her story was not one of being claimed, not one of being owned by fear or shadow. It was a story of standing, of survival, of finding strength even when her voice shook. The man who hunted her was gone, his shadow broken by the storm. And though scars would remain, she knew now that she was not alone. The Lakota warrior's eyes met hers, steady as ever. "The spirits keep watch," he said quietly. "But so will I, as long as you walk this earth." Tears filled her eyes, not of fear this time, but of release. She nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The storm had passed, and though the journey ahead was unknown, it was hers to walk, guarded not by chains of fear, but by a promise born of honor. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting gold across the plains, she felt the weight of the night slip away. The land was wide, the path unending, but for the first time, she was not afraid to face it. Her voice had been heard, and her story had changed. The hunter's shadow would never rise again, and the vow that had been spoken in firelight would echo across the plains, a reminder that even in the darkest storm, light could be guarded and promises could endure forever.